The human mind thinks that the way it presently thinks is the only way possible for it to think. It believes that it is exclusive, that the way it now revolves and makes decisions and presents ideas, that this is the only possible way it should work or can work. Being a false assumption, when something comes along that is different from these series of thoughts, of ideas, this set of beliefs, when something different comes along, the human mind gets disturbed. It gets defensive, it gets afraid. Because it says, how come there is a rival to my right, true, and exclusive world? And I've just described you in a few words the cause of all human hostility, in which an immature mind, enclosed behind its own walls, demands that it be the only mind that operates in this world, be the only one that's right, the only one that's true, the only one that's intelligent. Now, since millions upon millions of human beings think in this very same way, why human beings collide daily should be very clear to you. Everyone thinks that his world is the right world and the only one that has a right to exist. Anything outside of that is considered an intruder, an enemy, and therefore the individual thinks he has a right to punish or to hurt anyone who does not think as he does. Anyone who seems to take away his claim to being right, exclusive, privileged, or whatever. So the human mind, the way it presently operates, can do nothing but cause problems. The slightest suggestion of something different sets it off, because it's worshiping itself. And for something different outside of itself to come along becomes a threat to its false existence, and its existence is false. Take the example of a small boy who's brought up in the United States, and he's beginning to speak English fairly well and understands English when he hears it spoken. And his parents take him on a trip to Sweden. And they get in the airplane, and in the airplane the family converses, and the stewardesses converse with the little boy in English. Everything is fine. And then they land at the Swedish airport, Stockholm, and he gets out of the airplane, and while his parents are taking him by the hand and leading him away from the airport, he begins to wonder about something. And his parents take him to a cafe on the way to the hotel. And all the time he's hearing the Swedish language, and he doesn't understand it. At first he doesn't even know he's disturbed, because in the United States he understood everything that was going on. But here is something different, something he has never encountered before. And it does disturb him, because he wants to know what that man was saying to his father, what the waitress was saying to his mother. And there's no comprehension. And he resents being left out. Finally, the parents explain to him. They can see his discomfort, and they explain the whole situation, and he takes it in and becomes at ease. So remember the first great fundamental point. Anything that is not a part of your present way of thinking, your ideas, no matter how wrong they are, no matter how self-defeating they are, they become your God. They are the only ones who have a right to live in this world. Now do you know why human beings suffer all day long from living both with themselves and with other people? Now, this immature mind that we're talking about can never, never, never break through its own walls. The human intellect does live, act, think, react within its own walls. Now listen, this is very important to you if you want to change inwardly, if you want to be free of suffering. There is no way at all that the intellect can ever go beyond itself. No way at all. It must revolve right inside its own walls. Just picture a wall up there and all these millions of thoughts of any individual going through and banging themselves against the wall in an attempt to get out, in an attempt to prove itself, for example. It simply can't get out of its own system. Now that's a fact, and that's not bad. Understand, that's not bad, because this is the level at which the intellect must operate within a certain area, limited area. For example, memory operates there, and imagination operates there. Certain kinds of logic operate in there. So this is the limitation of the ordinary mind, and you must have a mind to work and to live in this world, must you not accept that it goes wrong even there, even elementary ways. The intellect does not operate properly. Now, while the mind can never go outside of itself, there is a superior intelligence that can walk right through that wall and be inside and occupy, so to speak, the same space, the same area as the mind, and live with it, so that both the intellect operating properly, using memory properly, using the mind in its own level in the right way. So this superior intelligence can come in and dwell right with the mind, each of them taking their own place, with this supreme intelligence, superior intelligence, taking precedent over the mind. That is, having authority over the mind, telling it how to operate properly. And unless this other higher intelligence does come in, the mind can never learn, because it can't teach itself. It can memorize, it can quote, but it can't teach itself what is right, because of itself it doesn't know it. It can set up moral codes, can't it? And how immoral those immoral codes are. There is real magic, true magic, in the mind coming to the place where it suddenly slows down and invites this superior intelligence. You want to call it God, that's fine. Call it cosmic consciousness. Call it authentic understanding, capital A, capital U. Call it what you like. But there is real magic when the mind, by giving up its own egotistical movement, invites this superior intelligence to walk right through the wall and to do its proper work as it is supposed to do, which is to instruct the mind and the life how to live. So you see, we have a position of a man in which he doesn't understand what we just talked about. And does this sound familiar to you? So he or she bangs himself against the wall, first against this side, like a trapped animal. This side and against that side, all the time not understanding the right process by which the mind can become intelligent. And how it becomes intelligent is to invite something higher than itself. Now, we have said that there is a superior intelligence. Now listen to this. This other mind, this utterly different higher mind with a capital M, knows everything about every human being on earth, including us in this room here tonight. It knows everything about it. It knows how we hide out, and it knows that we can't hide out from it, although we think so. It knows both the problem and it knows the cure. Do you understand a little bit about your own problem, which is simply that you don't understand, not yet, that there is something higher than you? And you're not going to find it by banging on the wall. You're going to find it by giving up trying to be a supreme egotist unto yourself, letting go so that something can come through the wall. Now, this supreme intelligence knows the problem and it knows how to cure it. I wonder if those of you listening and watching here tonight, I wonder if you know what your problem is. I wonder if you understand, first of all, if you really understand how dreadfully bad it is without being in despair over it. But simply see it as a fact without wrecking it by going into tears, without distracting yourself by hating your position. If you hate your lost position, you love it. Do you understand that, or should I explain it to you? If you despise your life, you love your life, because the very hating of it is what keeps it in place. Because this is an intellectual movement in itself which you would rather have than to relax and say, truth, come and save me. Did you understand that vast truth? And doesn't it give you a new clue as how to use to proceed in your life? I want to tell you a story which will follow up what I said about truth, reality, knowing everything about the human condition. And when I'm through, you will know more about it yourself. And maybe you'll nod inwardly while I'm telling it, because you'll see how true it is of yourself and of about the whole world that you walk around in day and night. There was a small village about 50, 60 miles distant from a big city. And in this small village lived 3,000 or 4,000 people. And every day or two, several people from the village would take a trip to the big city. And they'd stay 2 or 3 days, conducting business, doing what is necessary. And then they would come back to the small village where they lived. And everyone there noticed that when these people came back, they had changed. The neighbors noticed that their neighbors who had visited the city were more touchy, more irritable than they'd ever been. That they were lost. They walked around in a daze, and they seemed to have a lot of burning hostility in them. And this was very noticeable because they knew them. They were relatives. A relative went to the city, stayed for 3 or 4 days, and came back, and they seemed depressed and seemed isolated. And it was difficult to talk to them, even to ask them what was wrong. So this went on for a long time, several months. Some people would go on legitimate business to the city, and when they came back, they were depressed and gloomy and irritable and angry. So several people got together to discuss it, and among the several people was a retired detective. And he said, I've noticed it myself and my own friends who have gone to the city and come back. I think it's time we investigated what's going on. So they agreed that it was a good idea. So the detective, a retired man who had lots of experience in solving mysteries, drove to the big city and started looking around. And he had with him notes that he'd collected from the people who had visited earlier. He had notes, what they had done, where they had stayed. He had lots of clues to follow up to see if he could solve the mystery as to what had happened to these people when they were in the big town. For the first 2 or 3 days, nothing turned up. Most of the clues led nowhere. So one night, after uncovering no real clues to the mystery at all, he went to bed, tired. Went to bed at 10 o'clock, fell asleep immediately. And at midnight, something strange began to happen in his hotel room. And being asleep, he couldn't discern what it was, but something different was going on in that room. And he stirred a bit, and he opened his eyes a bit, and he closed them, and he slept restlessly for an hour or so. Finally, he awakened more and more and more until he became aware of what it was. And what was happening is that a voice was whispering to him in that room. And he froze in horror at the thought. He said, is someone in here with me? Who is it? What's he doing? What's going on? And he froze and listened carefully, and the voice went on. And the voice was saying endless things that would cause any human being to be disturbed. It was telling him what a terrible world this was, and how there's no point ever trying to change your life, ever trying to be happy, that gloom and depression were proper and necessary. Endless negative, sour statements in a soft but very persuasive voice. So finally the detective rolled out of bed, went over and turned on the light. No one in the room. But the voice kept coming. So things began to be put together in his mind. So he walked around the room, feeling the wall, and he felt a couple wires there, and he knew what was happening. This negative, destructive voice was being piped in from somewhere, probably in the hotel. But there it was, coming through the wall, and very soft. Then he found that at 2 o'clock, from 12, the voice went on from 12 to 2, and at 2 o'clock it went off. And he went back to bed, pondering the whole situation, got up in the morning, and when he got up, the mystery was solved. He knew what had happened to all his friends back there in the village, because they had stayed at that hotel. And he knew what was going on. So he went out, and he said, first of all, I'm going to find out the source of this voice, because obvious it's being piped to every room in the whole hotel. So he searched around casually, being a good detective about it, not being obvious. And the first thing he discovered, that sure enough, down in the basement was the machinery necessary, all the wires and equipment and their recording equipment, to play this phonograph record over and over and over, to make people gloomy and depressed and sad and feel hopeless. So he solved that mystery. He knew the what. And now for the why. Why would the owners and operators of that hotel do a thing like that? Why would they go to all this work to plant dark, horrible thoughts in human minds toward every guest that came to the hotel, hundreds of people a night? Why would they do that? So this took a little more detective work. So he went and he called on various agencies and investigated various papers and legal papers, the whole thing. Finally, he knew the answer to that, too. And he was horrified, as you should be horrified if you understand what I'm getting at. And you had better, for your own sake, understand what I'm getting at. And what he understood was this, that whole hotel and the owners of it were in a conspiracy to confuse people, to drive them mad, to take away their powers of reasoning so that they could take over the country. No doubt they were doing this in other hotels throughout the land, anywhere where they could catch people asleep, catch them off guard without them knowing what was happening to them, plant these thoughts in their mind, and then they took them and they acted them out. Have I described the world then? Of course I have. The whole world, everyone listening here tonight, while you were asleep, while you were spiritually asleep, psychologically asleep, when your mind only operated within its walls and said, keep everything else out, while it operated in that way, we listened to our own voices, our own negative voices that that were piped into our minds since we were little children. We didn't know what was being done to us. All we knew that we suffered a lot from it, didn't we? All we knew is that it made us depressed, and it made us angry, and it made us want to strike out. It made us very cruel people, didn't it? In which we didn't care what we did to anyone else as long as we got the thrill of striking out at someone. Continue a bit with the story. Once this very capable detective found out what was going on and knew the reason in back of it, he got up at midnight and he walked down the hall of the floor he was on, and he knocked on the door and said, wake up. and see what is happening to you. And someone came to the door sleepily. He explained to them. He went to the next door, pounded on the door, and he said, wake up and see what's happening to you. Went across the hall to the next door, across the other side, knocked on the door and said, wake up. Listen for yourself and see what is happening. Went to the next floor, went to the floor below, went throughout the hotel. And can you believe what I'm going to tell you next? Do you suspect what I'm going to tell you next? You do. Practically every person who came to the door angrily asked him what he was doing, and they said, please go away and let me sleep. No matter how much he tried to explain, he said, look, please, sir, just turn around where you are now and listen to what you can hear. It's very obvious if you'll listen to it. And this is the answer to your problems. You are being poisoned invisibly. You can't see it, but it's affecting you. Just listen to the voice of doom and gloom, and it will answer your question. And then you won't want to go to sleep in this room anymore, will you? He tried it. He did everything. And they angrily told him to go away and leave them alone. Well, what could he do? One person in the entire hotel said, just a minute. I'll see for myself if what you said is true. And this one person turned around, took a couple steps, listened carefully, and came out to the front door and said, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't believe that anyone could have been this evil to have done this to everyone in the hotel, to me included. But it's a fact. Thank you, sir. I can never thank you enough for telling me to wake up and to see what is happening to me. I could never be grateful enough to you for waking me up and saving me from that unconscious, malicious, evil influence. And when the detective went home, he ran into the same thing from his friends and relatives who had visited the hotel. They too said, what are you talking about? You're saying I'm angry and hateful all the time? What do you mean? I'm a nice, pleasant person. There must be something wrong with you, not with me, for you to tell me that. So with great patience, he tried to explain, and one or two of his friends and relatives listened a little bit too. So this superior intelligence knows what's wrong. It knows everything and a million more things that we have talked about and will talk about in the future about the human condition. It says we have all been asleep in our beds, dreaming that we're awake, dreaming that we're going to do great things, dreaming that all is well, taking our misery as being good. You know, you didn't understand what I just said, because you take your pains and you take your tears and you take your complaints as being good and necessary. Proof. You do it every day. You do it every night. You're in a negative state inside because you take it as good. You take it as good for you. And the reason you do that is because you don't know the alternative. It's because you have not been told or have not absorbed the facts that we started the talk with, that the mind can never go beyond itself, and it can only believe in itself no matter how malicious or how destructive it is. It says, I believe in you, which is the same thing as saying, I believe in my own sickness and my misery. I believe in that. What's it going to take to wake us up? The truth is knocking on the door of your life endlessly. It's right in front of you. It's right in front of every human being. If they would stop and look, if they would listen, if they would see that we have described them exactly, which means that truth does know you. It understands. I said it knows the problem. And if it knows the problem, as I said earlier, it also knows the solution. The solution is this. First of all, the solution is to all who want it. All who want to stop screaming, go away, and let me go back to sleep. The superior intelligence knows that you can begin to learn to dislike pain. You like it now. You can learn to dislike it because you understand the utter emptiness of loving suffering, of loving your sadness. The superior intelligence knows that you can begin to learn something different. You can get the facts, then you can operate on those facts. You can see, for example, that you have indeed been described perfectly here tonight. Have I not described your life? You know I have. And it was said earlier that the intellect cannot go beyond its own walls. It can only circle around and pound on them. So if the mind can't get outside of itself, that is, if the mind can't solve its own problems, which it can't, then what can? You can begin to learn this. You can begin to learn what can solve it. And what can solve it is you first of all grasping this with your mind. This is all you have now is a mind, you know. You don't have awareness, you don't have consciousness. You have a mind, and you're taking what I'm telling you with your intellect. And by the way, let me ask you, while I've been talking, has there been any disturbance in you over what you've been hearing? Has there been any rejection? Has there been anything in you that says, that is not true, I know better than that? Can't you look right now and see that the voice coming into the hotel room, wrecking your life? Can't you see it? See how beautiful it is? The solution is beautiful because it is close. It's as close as your willingness to listen and see that truth knows everything about the problem. Therefore, it can instruct you about the answers so that the pain begins to disappear, so that you don't have to fight in vain. You don't have to struggle. You don't have to suffer at all. And you don't have to cry. Everything that's necessary for you to learn can be learned because truth itself will teach you, not your own intellect. You've tried that now.